3 personal chefs quit the Hargrove estate in a single afternoon. The first left her knife roll on the driveway. The second sent a resignation text before she even reached the gate. The third, a James Beard semi-finalist who had cooked for 2 senators, sat in her car in the parking lot for 11 minutes before driving away without a word. Zoey Callahan walked past all 3 of them carrying a duffel bag over one shoulder and a cast-iron skillet she'd owned since culinary school tucked under her arm. "Rough day?" she asked the woman sitting in the car. The woman just stared at her, then slowly shook her head, the way you do when you feel genuinely sorry for someone. Zoey adjusted her bag and kept walking. The housekeeper, a compact woman named Mrs. Hensley, who moved like she had somewhere important to be at all times, met Zoey at the front entrance with a clipboard and the expression of a person who had long since run out of optimism. "You're the new chef." "That's me, Zoey Callahan. Pleasure." She offered her hand. Mrs. Hensley looked at it briefly, then at the cast-iron skillet. "Is that necessary?" "Always." Mrs. Hensley made a small sound in the back of her throat and turned toward the entrance. "Follow me. Don't touch anything. Don't speak to him unless spoken to. Don't try to be charming." "What if I'm naturally charming and can't help it?" Mrs. Hensley did not respond. She walked faster. The Hargrove estate sat on 12 acres of land in Westchester County, New York, and it was obscene in the most beautiful way Zoey had ever seen. Marble floors that reflected the light, ceilings high enough to make you feel small on purpose, windows that looked out over a rolling lawn so perfectly maintained it seemed digital. The kitchen alone was bigger than the apartment Zoey had shared with 2 roommates in Chicago for 4 years. She was still taking it in when a voice came from somewhere above her. "I didn't hire a new chef." Zoey looked up. Standing at the top of a curved staircase, one hand on the railing, dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than her car, was a man who looked like he had never once been inconvenienced by anything in his life and resented deeply that he was being inconvenienced now. Everett Hargrove, 38, founder and CEO of Hargrove Capital, named to Forbes 40 Under 40 3 times, currently glaring at her as if her presence in his home was a minor act of aggression. "Your nutritionist hired me," Zoey said. "Dr. Pearson. She said you've been refusing the cardiac meal plan for 6 weeks. I've been ignoring the cardiac meal plan for 6 weeks. There's a difference. The difference being? One implies defeat. The other implies choice." Zoey tilted her head. "That's a very sophisticated way of saying you'd rather eat steak and die." Dead silence. Mrs. Hensley looked like she was calculating how quickly she could leave the room. Everett came down 2 steps. His eyes were the kind of dark gray that made it hard to tell what he was thinking, which Zoey suspected he considered an asset. "You're fired." "I haven't started yet." "Then you're pre-fired." "That's not a legal term. I own 3 law firms. I'll make it one." Zoey set her duffel bag down on the floor and looked at him calmly. "Mr. Hargrove, Dr. Pearson told me about your condition. She also told me about the 3 chefs before me and the 4 before them, and the one who apparently left a strongly worded voicemail from a turnpike rest stop." She paused. "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to cook food that won't kill you. If you can find someone else willing to do that job after what you apparently did to the last 7 people, I'll happily go." She picked her bag back up and waited. Everett stared at her from the stairs. No one talked to him like that. No one had in a long time, maybe ever. At least not anyone who was still in the building 30 seconds later. 2 weeks, he said finally. His voice was controlled, deliberate. "If in 2 weeks you haven't annoyed me beyond tolerance, we'll discuss a formal arrangement." Zoey nodded. "What do you consider beyond tolerance? Talking too much?" "I'll keep that in mind," she said. "One question. You're already talking too much. Do you have a dietary preference beyond not this?" Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. A near miss. He turned and walked back up the stairs without answering. Mrs. Hensley appeared at Zoey's elbow. "The pantry is stocked, but he rejects most of it. He sent back a soft-boiled egg last Tuesday because the texture was, and I'm quoting, philosophically offensive." "Philosophically offensive," Zoey repeated. "He has a vocabulary, unfortunately." Zoey looked at the kitchen and felt, despite everything, a flutter of genuine excitement. She'd worked harder jobs than this. She'd cooked in a restaurant kitchen through a gas leak, a health inspection, and a sous chef who cried every day at 4 p.m. She'd fed 60 people at her cousin's wedding on a budget that should have fed 20. She'd learned to cook in her grandmother's kitchen in Nashville at 8 years old, and had never once made the same mistake twice. Everett Hargrove thought he was difficult. He had no idea. She lasted exactly 14 hours before he really tested her. At 5:47 in the morning, a single knock came at the kitchen door. Zoey was already awake. She was always awake before 6, a habit from years of opening restaurant kitchens, and found him standing in the doorway in a gray t-shirt and running shorts, looking slightly less intimidating without the suit, but still working at it. "I want breakfast. Good morning to you too." She turned back to the stove. "Sit down. I don't eat at the kitchen island." "Where do you eat?" "The dining room. That's 40 feet away and I'm one person." "Sit down." He sat down. Slowly, like a man conceding a chess match he wasn't sure he'd lost. "What's on the cardiac plan this morning?" he asked. "Steel-cut oats with blueberries and ground flaxseed." A pause. "No, you haven't tried it. I've tried oatmeal. It tastes like a personal failure." Zoey turned around. "What did you eat before the diagnosis?" "Eggs. Real ones. Bacon. Coffee." "Real coffee, not the decaf bereavement they gave me. How do you take your eggs?" He looked mildly suspicious. "Over medium toast, sourdough." Zoey turned back to the stove. She cracked 2 eggs into the pan, not the cardiac plan eggs, just regular eggs, because she'd spent the last 3 hours learning his blood work numbers from the files Dr. Pearson had shared, and she knew exactly what she could work with. She set the plate in front of him 8 minutes later. 2 eggs, over medium. 1 slice of sourdough, whole grain, toasted the way he'd want it. She could tell just from the way he'd said the word, slightly emphatic, the way people are about things they're afraid to lose. A small side of sliced avocado he hadn't asked for. He looked at the avocado. "That's not cardiac plan. It's cardiac aligned. There's a difference." He picked up a fork, tasted the egg. Said nothing, which Zoey had already learned was the closest he got to approval. "The avocado has no seasoning," he said. "It has lemon and a little sea salt. That's barely seasoning. It's elegant restraint. It's flavorless. Your palate's been burned out by overprocessed food for 15 years. Give it 2 weeks." She poured him a coffee, half-calf, a compromise she'd decided on herself, and set it beside the plate. "The goal isn't to make you eat sad food. The goal is to make you forget you're eating good food." He looked at her over the rim of the mug. "That's either very clever or very arrogant." "Both, probably," Zoey said. "It runs in my family." Something almost happened on his face again, that near miss. She was starting to catalog them. The days found their pattern. Everett complained about everything. The quinoa, the portion sizes, the way she rearranged his spice cabinet without asking, the smoothie she introduced on day 4 that he called an act of aggression in liquid form. He sent dishes back. He asked questions designed to be unanswerable. He once stood in the kitchen doorway for 3 full minutes watching her cook, not saying anything, just watching, as if waiting for her to make a mistake he could name. She never made one, not a single one. And slowly, quietly, things began to shift. On day 6, he stayed in the kitchen after dinner instead of disappearing immediately. He sat at the island with his coffee and read something on his phone, not speaking, not really acknowledging her presence, but not leaving either. The way cats sit in rooms with people they've tentatively decided are acceptable. On day 8, he asked her where she'd trained. Chicago. Before that, Nashville. Before that, my grandmother's kitchen in Brentwood. Self-taught? Grandmother taught. Which is better? He looked up from his phone. What did she teach you? That food is the first language. Before words, before money, before any of it, someone fed you. You remember that or you forget everything that matters. He was quiet for a moment. She sounds remarkable. She was. Zoey wiped down the counter. She died 4 years ago. I make her biscuit recipe every Sunday whether anyone's there to eat them or not. He didn't offer condolences, which she appreciated. He just nodded, once, like he understood something without needing it explained, and Zoey found herself wondering what he understood it from. It was on night 10 that she found out. She was in the kitchen late, prepping tomorrow's meals, when she heard it. Not a crash, not a shout. Something worse. A long silence that felt wrong, the way silence feels in a house when someone's in pain and trying not to show it. Zoey set down her knife and walked toward the study at the end of the hall. She knocked. Nothing. She pushed the door open anyway. Everett was sitting on the floor with his back against the leather sofa, one knee drawn up, papers scattered around him like something had been dropped and not picked up. His face was the face of a man who had been fighting something for a long time and had, at least tonight, stopped winning. "What are you doing down there?" she asked. "Leave." His voice was flat, empty. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "Not until I know you're all right. I'm fine. You're sitting on the floor at midnight surrounded by papers. It's my floor. That's a fair point." She sat down across from him, back against the armchair, same level. He looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "What happened?" He said nothing for a long time. The clock on the wall counted it. "Today is the anniversary," he said finally. Zoey waited. "My wife. She passed away 3 years ago." He stared at the papers without seeing them. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis too. He stopped. Started again. She was 34. The weight of those words settled into the room like something physical. Zoey felt it land in her chest. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Everyone says that." "I know. I'm going to say it anyway because I mean it." He looked at her. Really looked, for the first time without the armor of irritation or control. Just a person, exhausted, sitting on a floor. "Her name was Diana," he said. "She would have hated this house. She kept saying we should move somewhere smaller, somewhere with a garden she could actually reach. She wanted to grow tomatoes." He almost laughed, but it didn't make it out. "I kept saying we'd do it next year." Zoey was quiet. There was nothing useful to say, so she didn't try. "The cardiologist said the heart condition is stress-related, exacerbated by it." He pressed his fingers against his eyes. "So in a very literal sense, grief is killing me, and I have to eat oatmeal to counteract it. The oatmeal helps." Zoey said gently. "I know, that's somehow worse." She almost smiled. "You know what helps more? Don't say talking about it. I was going to say food. Actual food, made with intention. Something that costs something to make." She paused. "What did Diana cook, or what did she like to eat?" He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Sunday pasta," he said quietly. "Her grandmother's recipe, some Italian-American thing with sausage and fennel and too much garlic. She made it every Sunday regardless of what else was happening. When she was sick, she made me make it. I burned it twice." He stopped. "I haven't had it since." Zoey nodded slowly. "What do you usually do on nights like this?" she asked. "Work." He gestured at the papers. "Or I did. Tonight it's not." He shook his head. "The numbers don't make sense when I'm like this." "Then don't look at the numbers." She stood, crossed the room, and turned off the desk lamp he hadn't even been using, just leaving the warmer light of the hall lamp through the open door. "Lie down, even just here. I'll get you something." I know you don't need it. I'm offering it." She looked at him steadily. "You can refuse, but it'll take me 10 minutes and it might help more than the floor does." He didn't refuse. That was its own kind of answer. She made him chamomile with a spoonful of honey and a small bowl of buttered toast, plain, the kind of food that doesn't ask anything of you. She brought it back and set it on the coffee table and sat back down on the floor because she'd noticed he breathed more easily when no one was standing over him. He ate the toast without commenting on it, drank the tea. After a while he said, "You lost someone too." It wasn't a question. "My dad," she said, 3 years ago. Heart attack, very fast. I was in the middle of a dinner service in Chicago when my sister called." She smoothed the edge of her jeans with one thumb. "I finished the service. I don't know what I thought, that he'd want me to finish. That stopping would make it more real." She paused. "I've second-guessed that decision every day since." Everett was looking at her. "Did he know you were a chef?" "He taught me to love food, so yes." He knew. Then he would have understood. "Probably," she said. "Doesn't make it easier to sit with." They were quiet together for a long time, which was different from being quiet at each other, which was all they'd been doing for 10 days. At some point he said, "Why are you still here? Your hours ended at 9. "I'm not on the clock right now," Zoey said. "I'm just here." Something moved in his expression. Not the near miss this time, something that had gone deeper before it disappeared. "You're strange," he said. "I've been told. I don't mean it as an insult." "I know," she said. "Go to sleep, Mr. Hargrove." He actually did. Not right away, but eventually. She could tell by the sound of his breathing changing. And Zoey sat in the armchair with the empty tea things and thought about her father, and about food as the first language, and about how the most broken people were sometimes the ones who most needed someone to refuse to leave. She didn't know that Everett, somewhere between awake and asleep, was thinking, when was the last time someone sat in the same room and didn't ask for anything? The next morning, he was back in the suit, the armor fully replaced. He sat at the kitchen island and asked if the oatmeal could have actual flavor today. Define flavor, not this. Very helpful, Zoey said, and put a pinch of cinnamon and a drizzle of maple syrup, a quarter teaspoon, enough to matter, in front of him without further comment. He ate it, every bite. Mrs. Hensley, watching from the pantry doorway with a cup of tea, thought, well, first time in 3 years. Things between them continued to shift in ways neither of them named. Everett stopped sending things back. He started lingering in the kitchen the way he had on night 6, but now he occasionally spoke. About the markets, about a lawsuit he was handling, about nothing in particular, and Zoey answered in kind, and it became a kind of routine. Dinner at 7, conversation from 7 to 7:30. Then he disappeared, and she cleaned up and they pretended it wasn't becoming the best part of both their days. On day 18, Zoey made Sunday pasta. She found the recipe the old-fashioned way. She asked Mrs. Hensley, who had been in this house long enough to remember Diana making it, and who produced a handwritten card from the back of a kitchen drawer with the careful formality of someone returning something precious. She didn't announce it. She didn't warn him. She just cooked it, Italian sausage and fennel and too much garlic, and let the smell do what smells do. Travel through walls, through years, through grief. When Everett walked into the kitchen at 7, he stopped in the doorway. She watched his face do something complicated. "That's sit down," she said quietly. He sat. She placed a bowl in front of him. He stared at it for a long moment, and Zoey pretended to be very busy with the dishes. "How did you know?" he asked. "I asked." A pause. "Mrs. Hensley. She still has the card." He was quiet. When she glanced over, he was eating, slowly, and his face was the face of a man tasting something from a long way away. "It's not as good as hers," he said. His voice came out rough. "Probably not," Zoey agreed, "but it's close enough to remember." He didn't speak again for a while. Then, "Thank you. You're welcome." He looked up. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said. "That's why it counts." Something happened between them then, in the air, in the quiet of the kitchen, in the space between what he'd just said and what neither of them was saying. Zoey felt it the way you feel a change in barometric pressure. Something was building. She turned back to the sink. She had rules about this. She'd had them for years, built from a lesson she'd learned the hard way in another city with another powerful man who'd confused her competence for an invitation. She knew what it looked like when a professional situation started bending towards something else, and she knew the only move was to hold the line before the line disappeared. She held it. It didn't get easier. There was a woman named Cressida Vane who appeared at the house on a Thursday. All silk and deliberate ease, air kissing Everett's cheek with the practiced warmth of someone who had known him a long time and intended to know him longer. She was the kind of beautiful that looked expensive. She knew every right thing to say. At dinner, which Zoey served in the role of invisible professional, Cressida mentioned 3 times, at careful intervals, that she'd always thought Everett needed someone who understood his world. Zoey scraped the saucepan and said nothing. Afterward, when she was alone in the kitchen, she said several things quietly to the sink. The next day, Everett's brother, Conrad, arrived unannounced, louder than Everett, easier with his smile, and about as subtle as a foghorn. He shook Zoey's hand too long when she answered the door and said he'd heard about her cooking and wanted to see for himself. At lunch, he watched her move around the kitchen with an attention she didn't love and said, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more scared." "Of what?" He nodded toward somewhere in the house that meant Everett. "Of him. Everyone's scared of him." "I'm his chef," she said. "Not his audience." Conrad laughed, surprise, genuine. "Oh, he's in trouble," he said to no one in particular. Everett appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Conrad, the way older brothers look at younger ones who've said something they'll deny later. "What are you doing here?" "Visiting. Being supportive. Eating what I understand is life-changing food." Conrad picked up a bread roll from the basket on the counter. Zoey didn't stop him. "Also, Cressida called me. She wanted my read." Everett's expression closed off. "There's nothing to read. She seems to think there's something." Conrad glanced at Zoey. "Or someone." The kitchen went very still. Zoey set down her spoon with deliberate calm and said, "The soup will be ready in 10 minutes. I'll leave you 2 to talk." She walked out before anyone could say anything else. In the hallway, she stood with her back against the wall, for a moment, eyes closed. She was a chef. This was a job. She needed this job, not for abstract professional reasons, but for real ones. The debt from culinary school, the money she was still sending home to her sister in Nashville, the rent on a city apartment she could barely hold on to. She could not afford to become a character in someone else's story. But she already knew, standing in that hallway with soup steam in her hair, that something had happened to her that wouldn't unhappen. 3 days later, Everett walked into the kitchen at 11 p.m. and found her crying. She wasn't sobbing. She wasn't making a scene. She was standing at the counter with a kitchen towel pressed to her face, crying quietly the way people do when they're trying not to, and she startled badly when she heard him. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, turning away. "I'm fine. Zoey." She stopped. It was the first time he'd said her name. "What happened?" His voice was careful, different from his usual register. Something had been removed from it. She laughed, one short unhappy sound. "My sister called. She's going through a divorce. Second one. She has 2 kids and she's terrified, and She gestured at the 12 acres, and the marble and the 8-burner stove. "Here. Not there. Do you need to go?" "No, she's okay. She just needed to talk." She folded the towel and put it down. "I'm sorry. You shouldn't have to. Stop apologizing." He came and stood at the other end of the counter. Not crowding, just present. "Tell me about her." Zoey blinked. "Who? Your sister?" She looked at him, reading something in his face she wasn't sure she was reading correctly. "You don't have to do this. I know," he said. Quiet. Almost word for word what she had said to him 3 weeks ago. And Zoey understood. He remembered. He'd been paying attention. He was giving it back. She told him about Lainey. About the house in Nashville that felt smaller every time Zoey went back. The ex-husbands neither of them had wanted for Lainey. The 2 kids who were so good and so clearly trying not to cause trouble. The way Lainey still laughed too loud at the dinner table. She talked for 20 minutes, and Everett listened the way he did everything. Fully, without performance. When she finished, he said, "She sounds like she has the same stubbornness as you. Worse. She's got more charm, so she gets away with more. I didn't know that was possible." Zoey looked at him, and he was looking back, and there was nothing professional left in the way either of them was doing it. She looked away first. "I should clean up, Zoey." She stopped. He crossed the kitchen slowly and stood close enough that she could see the shadow of whatever it had cost him to do that. His jaw was tight. His hands weren't. "I know what this looks like," he said. "I know the complications. I know you have." He paused. "Every reason not to let this happen." "I do," she said. Her voice was steady. Her heart wasn't. "But I need to tell you something, because I've spent 3 years not saying things I should have said, and I've decided I'm done doing that." He looked at her, steadily, all the way through. "You came into this house and did something no one has managed since Diana. You made me want to eat. You made me want to wake up tomorrow. You made me," his voice lowered. "You reminded me I'm still alive, and I don't know what to do with that, but I know I can't pretend I don't feel it." The kitchen was very quiet. "You could lose everything," she said, "if your board found out. Your investors. Cressida. Conrad thinks it's already. Let them. Everett. I'm your chef. I'm a woman from Nashville with culinary school debt and a sister in crisis. You're a man standing in his kitchen at midnight asking you to stay." He took one step closer. "That's all I am right now." She wanted to say no. She'd built the argument already. She had it ready. She looked at him, at the man who'd eaten Sunday pasta and cried without crying, who sat on floors and answered questions honestly, who listened for 20 minutes about a sister he'd never met, and the argument dissolved. "This is going to be complicated," she said. "I know. I'm not giving up the job. I wouldn't ask you to. And I'm not disappearing into your world. I'll always be the person who rearranges your spice cabinet without asking." The smile happened. The real one, not the near miss, not the version that almost got there, the actual thing, and it was something. "I'm counting on it," he said. They stood there in the kitchen in the particular quiet that falls when something has been decided, and the deciding is a relief. She reached up and put her hand flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, which was steadier than it had been when she'd arrived, was steadier than it would have been without the past 3 weeks. Medical fact. Also something more. "Breathe," she said softly. He laughed, low and real. "Like a normal person?" Exactly like that. They didn't figure everything out that night. Conrad came back 2 days later, took one look at both of them over a plate of mushroom risotto, and didn't say "I told you so," which Zoey suspected took significant restraint. Cressida called, and was gracious about it in the way that people are when they're gracious to prove something. Zoey respected the performance even while she didn't trust it. Dr. Pearson arrived for a follow-up in the 4th week and reviewed Everett's blood work with the expression of someone recalculating. His numbers had shifted measurably. His sleep had normalized. His resting heart rate was down 11 beats per minute. "What changed?" she asked him. Everett looked toward the kitchen, where Zoey was on the phone with her sister, laughing about something, loud enough that it carried through the doorway. "I started eating properly," he said. Dr. Pearson looked between him and the kitchen doorway and wrote something in her notes that was probably not about food. Mrs. Hensley said nothing. She simply stopped having the expression of someone who had given up on optimism, which was, for her, approximately equivalent to throwing a parade. The first Sunday pasta they made together was a disaster. Everett burned the sausage because he was talking and not watching the pan, and Zoey added too much fennel because she was laughing and lost count, and they ate it anyway at the kitchen island at 9 o'clock at night. Slightly too salty, slightly too bitter, completely imperfect. "This is terrible," Everett said. "It really is," Zoey agreed. They ate every bite. "My grandmother would have told us to start over," Zoey said. "My wife would have done the same." He turned his wine glass slowly. "I think they would have liked each other." Zoey looked at him. "I think so too." He looked back. That was becoming its own language between them. The held look, the thing said underneath, the thing said. She was still learning its grammar, but she was learning fast. That night, after the dishes were done and the kitchen was clean, and Westchester was dark and quiet outside the windows, Everett sat at the island with a glass of water and said, "I want to tell you something." Zoey leaned against the counter. "Okay, I hired 8 chefs," he said slowly. 7 before you, 1 including you. The 7 before, I think I was trying to make them leave. I didn't know I was doing it. I thought I was just—" He searched for the word, "managing my situation. You were grieving," she said. "I was hiding." He turned the glass in his hands. "Diana would have told me that in about 45 seconds. She had no patience for self-deception." A pause. "You don't either. Is that a complaint? It's a fact." He looked at her. "I don't know how to do this, any of it. I'm aware of that." "Neither do I," Zoey said honestly. "I know how to cook. I know how to feed people. I know how to stay when it would be easier to leave." She lifted one shoulder. "The rest of it we figure out. That's either very wise or very reckless." "Both," she said. "Runs in the family." He smiled. Third time she'd counted the real version. She was starting to believe it was permanent. The spring came gradually to the Hargrove estate, which did not have Diana's tomato garden, but did have a south-facing wall alongside the kitchen that got the light just right. Zoey mentioned this one morning in March, not for any particular reason, just because she noticed things and said them. By April there were planter boxes along that wall. She didn't ask where they'd come from. Everett didn't explain. She planted tomatoes. He watched from the kitchen doorway, with his morning coffee, not offering to help until she handed him a trowel without looking up. And then he helped. They were hopeless at it. The first tomatoes were small and lopsided, and took twice as long as the seed packet promised. Zoey harvested them in July and made a sauce that night. Simple, just garlic and olive oil and salt. The kind of sauce that only works when the tomatoes grew somewhere you can see from the kitchen window. She put a bowl in front of him. He ate it without talking for a long time. "Well," she finally said, "Diana would have said it needed more basil." She'd be right. He looked at her over the bowl, the man who had fired her before she started, and now could not imagine the house, without the sound of her voice on the phone with her sister, without the smell of something good happening in the kitchen, without someone who rearranged his spice cabinet without asking, and was always, always right about it. "She would have loved you," he said quietly. Zoey felt something open up in the middle of her chest. "I hope so. I know so." He reached across the island and took her hand, brief, certain. She had excellent taste. Zoey laughed, which made him smile, which had become one of her favorite things. The ease of it now, the way it cost him nothing anymore, the way a man who had not smiled for 3 years now did it like breathing. Like something he'd remembered he knew how to do, like a person fully alive finally eating again.